Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the Engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.
Hey, this is Tyler Jones, and you're listening to the Element Podcast. What's happening, all my woods people? Man, the sky is on fire tonight, dude. KC, what's going on right now, man?
A little front porch sitting, man. It's a nice evening. Probably the best we've had this year.
Yeah, well, probably, but there were some good ones in late September.
There were.
But yeah, we've so it's raining. You probably can hear that if you listen real hard. You also probably can hear the sound of a flaming briquette of
I better go check on those.
Of deer. We've got some venison poppers on the grill right now, so Casey's going to be in and out checking on those things a little bit. But to the west, the sun is setting, and we're sitting on the front porch at KC's house. And it's a weird thing, man. The clouds are like, I don't know, it's like the clouds are thin, but they're fully encompassed all the way down to the horizon. So, like, you can just see this huge, just orange, crazy-looking sky over here. It's something that doesn't happen very often, I feel like. But what's the deal on them poppers, man?
Well, they're flaming up a little bit, Tyler. Yeah. It's just kind of one of those things. You know, I need to spend more money on that grill that has the, what's it called? Like the infrared things in there or whatever. Keeps like the drips from getting down to the flame.
That's cool. That's higher than my knowledge.
It's not actually infrared. It's kind of like, that's part of the reason why I didn't spend the money on it, because I was like, that's not a misnomer. That's not real. But pretty much there's like a heat shield. That's still, well, it's not a heat shield, but it conveys heat, but doesn't let the flame and the grease from like the bacon get to each other.
Yeah.
But right now, I bought the good bacon too.
Oh, dude. Hey, and there's something to that deal. Because like even, and it's not necessarily like that it's thicker or it's got pepper or anything. It's like there's just, like I've bought some bacon that's the same thickness and looks pretty similar, but it just tastes better, man.
Yeah, yeah.
And so like you just gotta kind of trial and error on that stuff. I feel like.
Well, I've got good bacon that is wrapped around my Pop's garden jalapenos, which are some of the biggest jalapenos I've seen out of a garden. And in those is the traditional cream cheese with marinated backstrap and tenderloin from a East Texas doe.
Baby, what's the marinade?
The marinade is a citrus, garlic, cilantro, and green chili marinade.
Where'd the green chilies come from?
Green chilies came from, I'm pretty sure, the Hatch Valley in New Mexico. So
cool.
I bought them in Colorado, but I'm going to take the people for their word, and their word was that they were from Hatch, New Mexico. So,
cool.
And it was like, it's a cool new ingredient I've never messed with, but it's, we got red chili powder, and this is green chili powder. So
it's really, actually powder?
It's powder.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
It's really good on eggs.
Oh, imagine, dude.
Real good on eggs.
Dude, I'm going to have to get some of that.
Flame up. I got to take care of.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So, one thing I wanted to make sure that before we got too far into this thing that we let everybody know is we've got a giveaway going on, correct?
That's right, man. And it's a sweet one.
Dude, this is the last one of the season. If you've been listening or you've seen some of our Facebook, or some of our Insta story stuff lately, This is the last one we're doing in 2018. So if you want a piece of gear from us in a giveaway in 2018 to use in your deer season or whatever season you might be involved in.
Turkeys. There might be some turkeys.
Turkeys.
Yeah.
In the little country. You are going to need to get involved in this giveaway. It's a simple way to enter. It's we don't like making the 3 processes and follow this guy and hashtag these friends or tag these friends and hashtag this or whatever. It's easy. All you got to do is go to iTunes and give us a 5-star review. That's all it takes to be entered into this thing. We would like to know what you like about the podcast, or what you like about what we do. That's the honest truth. That's what we would like you to say in the review. You don't have to get too detailed with it, but you are entered to win. And if you've already given us a review, you've probably heard us say this, some of you guys, but you go find your mom's cell phone and say, look, we're going to put a review for my mom on here, put a code name in that you remember or whatever, you're good to go.
Yeah, here's an idea.
Yeah.
This Sunday after church, make like venison stew or something, invite everybody over.
Yeah.
And you can have have you seen this? We talked about doing this for class.
Okay.
Like they do this at Chick-fil-A. There's like these family phone containers. And like everybody sits down at dinner and you put your phone in there and you all have a family supper.
Oh, yeah.
You can do that at Sunday lunch, but then grab it, run to the other room, and leave a bunch of reviews.
Yeah, you could do that. Or
Yeah.
you could do the same thing, but just ask and be like, hey, can I enter a contest? All I've got to do is give a review on iTunes.
That's true.
And you can watch me do it.
You could do that.
Or whatever. I don't know. There's probably ways to do it. But you can figure it out, I'm sure, even if you've already given us a review. It's simple. So let's get off of that. Tonight, after this podcast, we have a pretty cool thing going on. And so by the time you listen to this podcast, this will have already happened. But you can go back and watch our Facebook Live video that we're going to be doing tonight. So we're going to be answering questions. We've got a few that have been asked already on some of our social media platforms. And as the live video goes on, hopefully some people get involved and do some interactive stuff, ask us some questions. And these can be, these are anything. Could be goofy, could be a real deal. And most of them have been real so far. But we do have, like our buddy Alex, from Whitetail DNA, he asked a pretty good one about your looks, I think, is what he was asking about.
I don't know, man. I mean, he asked about like maintaining looks, and there's no maintenance to this, so I don't know if he's really talking to me or not.
Bro, I ain't shaved in like 3 weeks.
Yeah, no. I haven't had a haircut since February 2012, so there's that.
Yep, that's good. So anyway, that's cool. So if you're interested, there's going to be some good info there, I'm sure. We're going to talk about a lot about public land, bucks and bulls, and then whatever else comes up, and that will be on our Facebook timeline. So go check that out. So this podcast, and we visited some of these aspects of hunting already, but I feel like that when you talk about deer hunting and when you're talking about bow hunting in particular, like shooting gets the most attention sometimes, or most of the time. Like whether you're directing your shot, whether it's about like directing your shot to a certain spot, or shooting at a moving deer, or like whatever it might be,
or
practice
practice stuff.
Things like that. Like you're going to get a lot of attention, and there's a lot of great podcasts. There's a lot of great articles and YouTube videos about how to shoot, how to set up your bow, this and that.
For good reason.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, it's you want to be lethal with that thing when it goes off, and hopefully towards something else. But in all honesty, the art of the draw is something that doesn't get visited very often. So, and I think that without drawing correctly, you're not going to even get a shot off anyway. So, that's kind of the first step to making a good shot. I feel like, it's kind of ignored a little bit as a subject.
And it seems like there's a lot of lost arts in archery, and I'm no connoisseur by any means, but, like arrow building seems to be one, bow tuning's another, and I think like that skill that we're talking about is just something people kind of forget because our bows have gotten so fast that we think we can just outrun deer, and that's not the case. I mean, every deer that you and I have shot at in the past 2 years has ducked in some way.
Right.
And most of them lethal hits. But
and we talked about the pig that you shot.
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Stinking 150-pound board ducked like 3 or 4 inches.
I was videoing it in 120 frames per second. I went back and watched it. I was like, no way, that sucker drops like 2 inches, before the arrow gets there. Like, whatever it was, 25 yards or whatever.
So it's the emphasis that we're trying to put here is that like you have to be able to draw your bow, ready your weapon without alerting an animal.
Exactly.
Right? I'm not criticizing anyone because I've done it plenty of times. Actually, in Colorado, I did it twice, where you just got to draw when an animal's looking at you, right?
Yeah.
But I see a lot of times on hunting media where people will grunt stop an animal, they look at them, and then they draw their bow to shoot it.
Yeah,
That's not a great idea. I mean, it can work out, don't get me wrong, but there are other ways and interesting things that you can do to maybe ensure that, hey, that animal's not going to see you draw your bow, or you're not going to make this any worse for yourself.
Right. I absolutely agree, man. The art of the draw can make or break how well you actually shoot the arrow or where the arrow hits on the animal. You know?
Sure.
So, I guess being that we are cooking a doe from East Texas, we need to start with that, and that also is one of our most recent. That's the most recent draw either one of us have made.
Yeah. Well, I shot in the yard at the target since then.
Yeah. Okay. So, in a hunting
live animal,
in a hunting scenario.
Yeah.
So that was last weekend after work. You had the opportunity to draw on a doe, and that video's on YouTube. Feel free to watch it, and you can see how the art of the draw plays out in that.
Yeah.
But Casey, talk about the weather, the wind, etc. of that scenario on that Friday afternoon, and then how and why the draw went down like it did.
Well, Tyler, the weather was hot as all get out, as you remember very vividly. I'm sure you're asking me this just so the listener knows, because I know you remember. Yeah, it was really hot, and actually Tyler and I, we've been working together at work. Tyler's coming and helping me finish up this cabin I've been working on, which is cool, and it also gives us an opportunity to talk a lot and scheme and really talk about hunting most of the time. Sometimes when we should be actually concentrating on the task at hand. Not that we're not working, but you know how it goes. Anyways, that whole day we honestly were debating on if we should even go hunting that evening because it's so hot and the wind wasn't really kicking around like we wanted it to. It was supposed to kick around more out of the southeast, and it really was about a straight south, I think, about the time we went hunting. But, man, we'd only been in the stand once since season open. Now, given it's like 5 days, but still, like, we're hunters, we want to be deer hunting. That's, like, what is fun to me, and, like, I just kind of have this drive to do it. So this was a good spot to go, even when it's kind of like a questionable evening. Close to home. We actually had stuff to do that evening. I was going to the high school homecoming football game, which they won. Way to go.
I know it.
And it was a good opportunity for us also to work a full day and still get out for an evening hunt. So we head out to go on this hunt, and wind, as soon as we get there, we know it's like not perfect, but it's doable. And then it kind of starts to die, and it seems like I don't know if I know the exact mile per hour, but like somewhere around that 6 range. Anytime it's below that, it seems like it can swirl a good bit. Yeah. Especially when and we were on a field edge. Actually, to really lay it out, we were on a very small finger creek of timber that juts out into this field on a field edge. So, I mean, it's really just a line of mature oak trees, pretty much, that stick out.
Kind of makes a pocket in the field.
Yeah, you want to talk about like disaster waiting to happen on wind, But we had gone out and thrown a little bit of chump going out at this place, trying to get the does kind of centered, because honestly, when you have the opportunity, it's a pretty good way to shoot a calm deer.
Well,
right?
Absolutely, and at 20 yards, you know what I mean? Like
exactly.
Instead of 40.
Yeah, where if she would have came out now to lay this out, Tyler and I were setting up, still trying to get some microphones ready, and we see this doe in the tree line rustling around back in there. And like, oh, Tyler, deer. I thought she'd seen us because we were like moving pretty handily up there trying to get the microphone working.
I was raging on this battery that wouldn't come out of the wireless
I'd already
pack.
tried to get it out and couldn't get. And I was like, "Hey, Tyler, get this." And so it's funny because I'm hooked up to this lab mic that's on my lapel, and then Tyler actually has the battery pack in his hand, so we're connected via a wire in the
But
stand,
frozen at the same
frozen, trying to like not let this deer see us. All the time we are slightly backlit by the sun, which is kind of good and bad. Like your movement can show up good, but if you're still, that deer's not going to see you because you're just black blurs, So luckily she didn't see us, but what I was trying to get to is if we didn't have that little bit of corn out right there, she would have stopped at 40 yards and 8 acorns probably until dark.
Yeah.
Right there. But she had it on her mind what she was going to do. So she very meanderingly, if that's a word, meanderingly?
It sounds like a very difficult word.
Let's
to
rephrase it a different way. She very slowly meandered. That's better. And
yeah, that's great.
Very
Dude.
slowly
Way to use
meandered.
that.
Her way closer and closer to us. At one point, I thought she was actually not going to come to us. She was going to like forego the corn and just keep on eating acorns. But she ended up turning back our way. And I think after rewatching this film, I think she may have got a whiff of us for just a second at that one point.
Man,
something
it does
happened.
look like it.
The wind swirled. It might not have been a whiff of us, but something different. And that's the thing with wind swirls is that it's like for us cutting the bedroom light on in the morning when it's been dark. I would imagine that's what it's like for deer. Like it's a whole new experience. Like there's a whole new batch of smells they smell whenever that happens. So it doesn't even have to be us, but like she threw her head up, smelled.
I thought we were toast.
We were like,
in the moment,
she's like 33 or 4 yards at that point, and then finally calmed back down, and then came right on in. And this is where we are getting into like the subject of this podcast, which is the art of the draw. I'm not going to say I'm good at this, but I'm learning, and it went really well that night. This deer was going real slow. Otherwise, I would have drawn a lot earlier. Like I had oak leaves and limbs. That's a cool thing about hunting early season here too. Is you got a lot of leaves. It's actually not cool most of the time, but it was cool in this one instance. It actually stinks most of the time. But in this one instance, she couldn't see me at all, so I could probably get away with a lot more movement than what I was doing. But it gave me an opportunity to stand, which is how I like to shoot. I like to shoot standing. She went behind this oak limb. I stood up and kind of readied my bow and propped my cam on my thigh, and she was going real slow, so I would have normally drawn if she was like moving, drawn when she was behind that oak, but I was like, I've been practicing a lot, I'm pretty stout, like, I can hold full draw for a minute and be fine, but I'm not going to do that, I'm going to wait till she comes out. She'll give me a chance if I let her, I all the time thinking, it's going to be tough either way. And I think you actually even said that while we were in the stand.
Because it was starting to get dead calm.
Yeah, it was.
And she was facing at us, and I thought, well, she's going to come right here. It's going to be tough.
Yeah, and she ended up at 18 yards, I think, whenever she finally cleared that tree limb. And quartering to, eyeballs just shining right at us, like we were toast if we moved. And waited around long enough, and this doe
started eating corn,
and did a little grooming thing or whatever. Well, then there probably was deer behind her we never saw. I don't know, but I think she thought she heard something back in the woods and turned her head, and that was my chance right there.
So at the moment, her body is facing directly at us. So if you were to shoot at her, it'd be a full frontal.
Yeah,
basically.
It was full frontal pretty much, and I'm not going to take that shot.
Right, and so which is like 8 inches wide.
Yeah, on that little doe.
But
my broadhead would have cut her in half. I was shooting a Rage Extreme,
Yeah.
And side note, like that was tactical at that point because I wanted to make sure we got this doe down pretty quick.
Yeah.
And I don't really advocate that big of a broadhead anymore because it's just not great for penetration. It's just a lot of drag. But on a small East Texas doe, not going to be a big deal.
Right. So. Well, so at the time she's facing us, and so when KC says she thought she heard something behind her, she's literally her head is facing 180 degrees away from us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So anyway, when that happens,
that is my opportunity to draw. Now, let's think about the time that spanned between when I actually drew my bow and when she was first in range. Because on a unalert doe, which is what she was at 40 yards, that's technically within my range. She is going to move some, but we know to account for that. But I mean, what? It was like 7 or 8 minutes probably, at least, of us standing there while she came in, right? So that's 7 or 8 minutes of planning and plotting on how this is going to go and how my draw is going to go. And I think it actually made me calmer at the time of the shot, too, because I kind of had that time to calm down. Now, I did remember once I drew, my heart started beating pretty good.
When she stepped out from that limb, you know what I'm talking about?
It's always that moment you're like, it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's happening now. Like until that point, I was like, yeah, there's a chance she's going to wind us or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm not getting too high.
Yeah.
And it's like in Nameless when he came through the cottonwood at 60 yards. That's when I was like, this is probably going to happen.
Yeah, and to be honest, like, it doesn't matter. East Texas doe, Midwestern whitetail, Colorado elk. Like, at that moment, it is the biggest event in your life. You know what I mean? Like, it's so big.
You don't think of nothing else.
And I had to calm myself after that. But then after that, I was chill. And I can remember it was so still and so quiet. I was concerned with her hearing my arrow being drawn through my wrist. So I actually leaned my body down so that the full weight of my arrow wasn't on my wrist.
Yeah, I got
and
you.
drew back.
Man, that's a good tip.
Kind of set up.
I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah,
that's a good tip.
But and partially, I was concerned about that because I had taken that fuzzy stuff off my wrist and it was going for straight plastic on carbon. Other people might not be that big of a deal, but I've since fixed that. But those little things in those QAD box packages or whatever, they're kind of tough to put on, and I messed it up the first time, so I rolled with it plastic for a while.
Mine's like a good centimeter higher on one side than the other side.
yeah, they're kind of jank. But anyways, at that moment, I had that going on. So I think that like in a super still situation on a deer close, I think that's something I'll probably start trying to do if it's possible.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea, man. I mean, I had never thought about that. You know?
Yeah. Well, it might, I don't know, there might be minuses to it, like your movement profile might be bigger because you're not drawing back, at a 90-degree angle from the deer.
You drew, I remember at the time when you drew, I felt like you drew slower than any human could possibly draw.
Did you really?
I did, but then when I go back and watch it, it wasn't as slow, I guess, as I thought it was.
Yeah. I remember concentrating on making it slow. Yeah. And it's funny how, okay, we'll talk about other scenarios in a little bit, but most of the time when I draw, it's not the whole Jello arms. It's opposite. It's like I'm the strongest human alive. I don't even feel my bow. Like out here practicing the yard, I'm like, that was kind of like a,
It's like I could be pulling 110 right now, and it's just fine.
Yeah, that's right. But that's how it was then. That's why I was able to go pretty slow because it's like, okay, 71 pounds, big whoop.
Yeah.
But got that draw done, and then she turned around. I would imagine that she was facing away 3 seconds and my draw took 2 or something like that. I don't really know. I can't remember for sure. But
so I don't know if you thought about this, but if you don't mind, I'll add a touch right here.
Yeah.
So this is how I saw from the time basically she turned around her head. Obviously, because her head's looking away, it's the perfect time to draw. But you also have to think on a doe that's moving that slow, or you're going to have to hold on a full frontal forever.
Sure.
But the reason that it was a great time to draw was because before she whipped her head back around, she hadn't taken a step in 15, 20 seconds.
Yeah.
So I mean, in my opinion, after watching deer for several years like I have, when that deer looks back forward, she's going to take another 2 steps. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's just kind of how they see.
She's kind of checking her tail. Now, and I don't know if I really consciously or I know it didn't consciously, but I don't know if I subconsciously factored that in or not. it's hard to say, but you're right. Like that's what she did, and deer do that.
Deer
right?
do that, exactly.
Yeah.
As soon as when they look up at something while they're standing there and they haven't moved in a while, when they look back to normal or do whatever they're doing normal, they're probably going to take a step or two at least,
And at that point, I was prepared on her next step if I had to take a slightly quartering too, but I'd already I've studied a decent amount of anatomy things like this off season, especially after like your nameless buck, which was like dead ringer, but we were still concerned just because like we aren't as familiar as we need to be with a deer anatomy, right? But I like something I've really learned this year is that there's a pocket above the deer's elbow where the shoulder blade and the scapula and stuff come way forward, and I've always like aimed. Here's the leg. Y'all can't see me, but think about where the elbow is. And I've always aimed just like an inch shy of that.
Yeah.
But you don't have to do that.
I mean, at least that's the way I was taught.
Yeah. That's
right behind the shoulder.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Exactly. But honestly, especially if it's slightly quartering too, and you're close and you feel great about, shot placement, I don't see why you couldn't crowd it up. I think actually there's this thing called the golden triangle, which I heard about from John Dudley. I don't really know if I completely understand, but they talk about it on elk and African game. Like that's actually the pocket you want to hit is that soft spot, in between like the point of the scapula, the point in the front of the shoulder, and then the elbow right there.
Yeah.
So
man, I've heard people that are like, you don't want to crowd the shoulder and this and that, but I've seen. Here's the thing. If you're aiming an inch behind the shoulder, that elbow joint, like we kind of grew up learning, if you hit a few inches back, the way that the lungs are shaped, you're going to get liver mostly.
Yeah, and especially if there's any quarter to at all. I mean, that's the thing, dude, is like I've learned from some video that you have and some other people I've seen, like deer might look brodside and they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
And their body, like even nameless, like he was like, he looked broadside, but actually his spine was curved while you shot him.
Right. Yeah.
So he's actually quartering away.
Yeah. You got to be careful of those little small, minute changes in body position and stuff. And liver is usually deadly. But if you have listened to the podcast we did with Justin Wright, my buddy, about. I think it's called Defeating a Loss was the name of the episode, and it's about losing a deer. And it was a shot that I literally thought was a heart shot until we went back and watched it, and I was like, it's a little back, but there's blood everywhere. It's got to be lungs, and I think it ended up being mostly liver, And so it's scary. It's scary, You just got to try to make a good shot, but yeah, I mean, so you had a spot kind of picked out as she was looking backwards.
Well, I was thinking that I was going to have to maybe take a slightly quartering too at that point. And then it was just kind of one of those great things that happens. She just kind of
took more than 2 steps.
She took about 3 or 4 steps, and almost a very similar way to the doe that you shot from the same stand last year, except it was inverted, where she came close and then kind of quartered out, and about 4 steps later, she stops, shoulder forward, front foot forward, and I anchor pin and
yep, it's perfect. And the draw was literally at the perfect time. I mean, it was like she looks backwards, you do a slow draw. About a second or 2 later, she looks forward and takes the steps that I assumed she would, and I'm sure you did subconsciously, hopefully, or if not, then
either way it worked out.
It worked out.
I was
we were
prepared to
blessed.
hold at that moment. Like I knew, and that's why I didn't draw any earlier, because I knew I'd have to hold for an amount of time. I think I ended up holding for like 5 or 6 seconds. I don't really know how long it was, but
and I think a big key here is. I mean, obviously, like you could have had what you could call more patience, where you wait till she's broadside and then looks away if that happens. You don't necessarily know it's going to happen, but you could have waited longer. But you had waited a while. I mean, like, say you're good out to 40. We wanted to shoot a doe at close range because you're going to get that opportunity a lot more often than you on a mature buck. And so you don't want to go. We didn't want to be chasing a doe all night trying to figure out, this weak blood trail or something, and we didn't want it going, private properties are small around here. So
anytime you can kill a deer at close range, do it, because it's fun to be close to deer.
Heck yeah.
And that's the name of the game. That's why we archery hunt. You know, I mean, right now, of course, that's what we are restricted to. But come November, we're still going to be hunting with our bows because it's fun. So just get them close. It's cool.
Oh yeah, and so that's like patience. I think definitely you had plenty of patience in that situation. I would have drawn at the same time you did. But I don't know, finding that fine line is something that, and basically, and I think for a lot of people, if I was to suggest something to somebody who hadn't hunted a bunch, maybe it would be to have patience, because we were over here watching a series, a YouTube series that we've talked about before on the podcast. I won't name it because I don't want to, it's maybe a negative connotation, but the series is great. But some of the people on this series, I was noticing when we were watching this year when they were dropping episodes that a lot of these guys were making kind of some bad shots, and so I start analyzing, which I can kind of analyze on the run sometimes, and so I'm like, man, what did he did that wrong or this wrong in my opinion. And I know, like, when you get in the game, in the moment, like, things go haywire sometimes, and you don't always make the best decisions, and that's fine, but what we're learning from it, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like a lot of guys aren't patient sometimes. I think that one instance, for example, is there's a guy who's got a target buck on his property, okay? And he's excited. And this buck, and I would think this guy in the area he hunts has shot several deer probably this big, but maybe not. Kind of an older guy. And he has this buck at like 25 yards eating out of his like just manicured food plot, and he's completely calm. And there's some other deer in there and stuff, and he's just completely calm. And I'm like, I mean, that deer is going to stay there for a while, there's no reason to rush this shot. And this dude, rips one off at 25 yards or whatever it was with this deer angling, quartering hard to him. And I'm like, dadgum, like this deer, if you give him 60 more seconds, he probably ends up broadside one way or the other, maybe 3 minutes, whatever. But like, you just got to kind of control your emotions sometimes in those situations and try to make better decisions, I feel like. And anyway, that's an example. There's other examples I've seen that I've noticed on not just this series by any means. I've noticed this across the web and in a lot of hunting shows. But I think that the grunt stop is something that a lot of guys are not patient enough on.
Yeah.
I feel like that I've seen a lot of dudes grunt stop and shoot a deer before he even stops. And I can't imagine that does a very good job of what you're trying to do,
No way. I mean, there's no way you anchored your pin that well as that deer was moving. And, there's something Jared Mills we had on the podcast.
Yeah.
And I just watched an episode of Midwest Whitetail the other day, and we had Bill Winke on the podcast too, right? Okay, so like they're doing a bunch of doe shooting right now. That's what a lot of people are doing this time of year, right? You're talking about grunt stops. Jared Mills is good.
Yeah.
Jared goes, if the deer doesn't do anything, he goes, and then if it doesn't do anything again, he goes,
just increasing.
Just barely, dude. Like he starts so soft, and it's amazing how many of the doe. I think I watched him kill 2 does, and both of them were on the softest of grunt stops. And instead of like whipping their head around and looking up in the stand, like, what was that noise up there? They like kind of look the wrong direction, but they still look and they stop, and it's like, what an opportune time to shoot a deer that's not looking at you, that is standing still. Yeah. It's pretty cool.
I feel like Jared played college baseball.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's like an advantage. I feel like when you've been in big situations where, like, say it's the bottom of the ninth, you need an RBI here, you're at the plate, you got 2 strikes, whatever it might be. Like, the dude's played a lot of baseball, and so he can think clearly well in high pressure situations like that because of that. Maybe I feel like that's an advantage I might have as well, where I've had that opportunity.
Well, and y'all both have something else in common, that you've got to hunt like world class deer a lot, of your life too.
Definitely that takes the chill
and
or whatever.
Jared's had opportunities at 200s, and it's like once you can do that kind of thing a few times, it's the same way with me with elk. Like, I feel like. And I told you that's something I thought of whenever I started getting jittery with that doe, is like, okay, Casey, you just shot a bull elk this is a whitetail doe, like it's not that like I'm demeaning her anyway, but it is a smaller animal, and you're in a tree stand, and you're not like
it's not rushing at you.
Yeah, it's not running around and just smelled you or anything. Like everything's cool, and it was calming, and I think that's kind of the thing. It's like it's the whole like. When you get to the end zone, act like you've been there before kind of deal.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah, and if you haven't been there, it's hard to act like you haven't been there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
that's right.
So, I think that's definitely an advantage. And I think, as far as drawing goes and that kind of thing, or just, getting drawn and then the move after that to get the deer to stop, it's a good tip, to start soft and increase. I think I did that on that doe in the same tree stand last year as what you shot.
I don't even remember.
I think I multi-grunted at that
Did
doe.
you?
Mm-hmm.
I do know that, we're talking about the draw, and it's pretty humorous, actually, because earlier you were talking about, like, being patient with your draw. Mm-hmm. Last year, whenever Nameless came in, I was going insane in my head because you weren't drawing it. I'm like, what is he doing? This deer's at 30 yards, and Tyler hasn't even drawn his bow yet. And then you double clutch twice.
Yeah.
And then finally draw back. And I'm like, what is happening? Like, I know Tyler can pull his bow back. Like, I don't know, like, what's going on.
Is he cold?
Yeah. Answer is yes. But you were cold. I was cold. I was freezing, too. But I would like for you to break down that little scenario, because it's like, it's well documented in video, like what happened and what was going on there. And I want you to, like, explain it to me, because it made sense after the hunt, but I had no idea what was going on when it was happening.
Yeah. Oh, it's funny because this doe hunt was really one of the first times I've ever been able to kind of, like, be in a stand when a deer was actually harvested. I mean, I've been in the stand and videoed a few guys make shots that maybe didn't pan out good or whatever. But I remembered, I was like, when you're the camera guy, you have no clue what's about to happen, it feels like, when you pulled the trigger on that doe, like, I knew it was coming soon. I just didn't know it was going to happen that quick. I was like,
and I'm glad that we've spent enough time in the stand together to, like, know when that's about. Like, we didn't ever have to say, are you ready? Like, we're done with that.
Yeah. Unless I say no, we're going,
Yeah.
So, but it kind of went off and surprised me. And so, like, I understand kind of what you're talking about. And it was probably to the nth degree with this deer, being that it was a buck and then it took so long, we're talking 40 yard. This deer, Nameless was 500 or whatever when we first saw it.
Yeah, no kidding.
And so, he comes in, and gets to 33 and shoves his head into a cedar tree and starts just raking it, He just starts raking this tree. And so, like, at this point, he is basically going down a trail, or he's on the edge of a trail while he's raking this tree that it's hard to see on the film, but this is a trail that a younger buck had come down earlier this morning, the morning that we shot him. And he comes down the trail and ends up at like 20 yards or so in like kind of an open area where there isn't a bunch of tall grass. And so knowing that, having that in the back of my head, he's at 33. There's a bunch of, tall CRP type grass and tumbleweed and everything else around him. And I really don't want to force a shot into that thick, just nasty CRP and have a chance of it,
I probably would have.
Messing up. Yeah, and you said that after. It's just something. I'm glad you admit that,
Well, I think that I learned that from you. Like, I can learn a lot. We can all learn a lot from each other, and I've learned a lot from you on this stuff.
Well, I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So, I didn't want to force that shot. Now, if he'd have done anything weird and started going a different direction that wasn't going to be good for us, I probably would have ended up trying to force one into a window somewhere. But I knowing that deer had come through earlier and kind of seeing that pattern, it was one of those deals where it was probably, I don't know, it was just, I was in autopilot at that point, it feels like, but I wasn't blackout or anything, but like, I just kind of, I felt like, I kind of just felt comfortable. Like you said, I have done this before a few times, so I felt comfortable. I felt like I knew what might happen, and I don't know that I can consciously, oh, those smell so good. I don't know if I can say that I consciously said, like, I'm not gonna. He's gonna come down this trail behind where this, behind this deer that had come through earlier.
Yeah.
But I can almost say for sure that I thought it somewhere in my mind. I knew that somewhere in my mind. So anyway, he pulls out of that cedar bush and comes right down the trail, man, just like he was supposed to. And he ends up at 23 yards, eating a cottonwood leaf, which was weird, a dead cottonwood leaf, or a few of them, I guess. And he ends up at 23 yards and finally does the quartering thing. But so when between 23 yards and 33 yards on this trail, there's another smaller cedar.
I think there's two in there.
Yeah, I think you're right. So there were two. They're pretty close to each other, I think. And so my thought is the art of the draw for me plays out behind those cedar trees, basically. Mm-hmm. So when he goes behind the cedar tree, that's when I draw. And it's windy, dude. It was blowing like almost 20 miles an hour probably. And so I wasn't worried. And there are probably situations where I could learn from you on this, but I like to yank it back when it's time. You know what I mean? Like you said earlier, and that's why I was laughing so hard. Like, it doesn't take much, I'm just going to rip this thing back to the wall.
That's why I was like, what's happening, right? Because I knew that you can pull it,
yeah.
And no problem.
And so he goes behind the cedar tree, and I go to draw. And, dude, I watched it. I get to, full draw. I don't know. I was at the wall almost. Yeah. I don't know. I was, there.
That's why I thought, maybe your draw arm had
couldn't
hit
get back
something
or something.
Yeah. I didn't. Yeah.
Okay, so I get pretty much all the way there. I don't know if I was actually back at the wall, if I had broke it over, but I was so close it wasn't even funny if I hadn't. And he stops right there in the middle of my draw. Mm-hmm. He stops behind that cedar tree.
Of him.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's that cedar tree is between us. And so he stops, and I'm like, I ain't holding this. This dude's been poking the whole time, I'm not gonna. If he was on a path or chasing a doe or whatever, it'd be a different deal.
Oh, he could have very well sat there and raked that cedar tree just like he did the one 10 yards beforehand for 5 minutes.
And so I'm like, I'm not holding this. And so I go to let down, and as soon as I let down, he starts moving again. So I start to yank it back, and he literally just took one step. And so I start pulling it back, and I get maybe half draw, and then I put it back again. I'm like, I ain't holding this. Mm-hmm. And so finally, he starts to kind of mosey off from that spot, and I draw, and he comes out from the cedar tree, and it was still 45 seconds. I believe I held the draw for right at 45 seconds.
Was it really that long?
I looked at it on film.
It's and that's the next step to this. We talked about with the doe, but it's once you draw, it's the art of holding and waiting on the perfect shot to,
right. Sure, yeah. And so I held, and he finally stopped. And then when he stopped, he was facing almost directly away from us. You can see it in the film. And so while he's eating cottonwood leaves and smelling around and doing a big buck thing, he finally turns,
Dude trying to act like he's just going to bail off through the brush and give us heart attacks.
It was kind of scary for sure. He could have easily just gone straight away and ducked out of that stuff. So it's one of those situations where we definitely got lucky. Could have had too much patience, or whatever.
Sure.
But I ended up feeling good about it. So until something goes wrong, I'm probably going to continue to try to have quite a bit of patience and just look for that good shot. It turned out well, and there will be a time, I'm sure, if we have enough encounters and where we're blessed with that, we're gonna have too much patience or not enough or whatever. It's a hard thing to do.
Well, I can tell you, I kind of learned that. That's kind of our two good whitetail examples, but I think that something that really helped me on that doe was going to Colorado and hunting elk the previous week, or I guess maybe it was 2 weeks ago, whatever it was, and I ended up drawing on 4 different elk. I drew on a cow.
Oh, yeah.
I drew on a bull that I had a deflection. I drew on the bull that I hit high, and I drew on the bull that I shot and killed.
And you got no more arrows.
No, all my arrows is gone. The KC Arrow Fund is open on GoFundMe. Anyways, I learned a lot in doing all that. And the biggest thing I learned is that we're so lucky as tree stand whitetail hunters that we get to set our feet and set up our shot, because so many times when I was elk hunting was I out of place trying to draw my bow. Just my feet were crossed or whatever. And I think 2 different times I found that I didn't have my shoulders squared around, and I tried to draw my bow, plenty of strength, but I don't have the draw length because your bow is in front of you and it's not, out here to your left, if you're a right-handed shooter. So
that's something you learn?
I learned that a big thing.
Yeah,
yes.
so it taught you probably to set your feet, square your feet up before that deer or the elk gets in there close to you?
I took golf in college as one of my PE credits, and I've learned now, I think from that shooting your bow has to be a lot like a golf swing. It's not just about the back swing and the front swing. It's about the walk up. It's about like what you do with your hands beforehand and all that. Like that's how shooting a bow needs to be. Whenever you walk up to hit a golf ball, this is kind of what I learned. I'm not a good golfer, but it's what I learned. Like from like adjusting your hat to like how you wiggle your hands on the grip and it all needs to be the same every time. And that's what you got to do with the bow is you have to have a system where you're like, okay, knock your D loop, set your bow, put your tension against it, square your shoulders, draw. That's not really my system perfectly, but I learned that like squaring your shoulders, I need to keep that in the front of my mind when I do stuff.
Yeah, that's a good tip. It's something that you don't think about, obviously. Like you're just like, oh, I'm just gonna call this bull to me.
That's what I did.
Yeah, and then all of a sudden you're standing square and you can't move.
When a 600-pound animal is 20 yards away, like things get weird. So like it's like one of those times when like you need to have a subconscious ritual. That way, like your conscious can be on the task at hand.
Yeah. Now I feel like there's a few more like tips that you could give us on the elk thing because like. I don't know. Like sometimes you've talked about when we were up there, especially you were talking about like, these elk, they're not as like alert to movement sometimes because they're just usually seeing big, huge animals moving through, and noise and that kind of thing. But I do know that elk did see you draw last year. You know what I mean?
Which I thought was weird, but
right. So like, I guess, did that change the way you thought about things this year as far as like, I'm going to draw when he's behind a tree or?
A little bit.
Yeah.
I think that if I had an elk in the open, and so the elk last year was like coming in fast and was close, and like he was just scared when he saw something, right? And he was looking for movement already. But it's kind of like I've heard this at least. I haven't got an opportunity to rattle a lot of deer in, but I've heard that like if you're on the ground rattling, it's okay to just grab your gun and shoot the deer when you see it. Like, that's what Pop has taught me about that. Like, they're looking for movement, right? And they're going to be around for a second. And that's in a rifle situation, of course. But it's kind of the same thing, where, like, it's okay to just, like, if the elk isn't focused on you already, go ahead and draw your bow. You're not going to shoot it with your bow not drawn. And something that's different on elk than on whitetail is the patience thing. I've found that, for instance, the elk I shot in 16, I shot within 15 seconds of knowing he existed. The elk I shot this year, I shot within 10 seconds of knowing he existed. Like, you got to get your bow back.
Right. Big target, too, so that helps,
Yeah, for sure, exactly. And, like, I know, like, you want to know exactly, pick a spot, all this and that, but it's a whole lot easier to settle your pin on an animal that's the size of a 55-gallon drum than it is to settle your pin on something that's the size of a sack of flour, like a East Texas doe. You know what I mean? Like,
that was a good analogy.
It's about what it is. Anyways, I think that, like, with elk, within reason, you're going to draw your bow as soon as you can. And I didn't do that on the cow, and I think it bit me in the butt because she ended up actually catching me drawing.
Yeah,
because
I noticed that.
I was trying to do it slow.
Yep. It looked like if you'd have done it fast, you'd have got it before she came out from behind that spruce.
If I'd have done it as soon as I heard her run in, I would have had my bow drawn.
Yeah.
But I was hurt, and I was like, oh, here it goes. And I like kind of held my bow, and then she got behind that spruce, and I went to draw slow, and then she
pops
caught
out the other side and sees you. Yeah.
But I don't know. I think it's just I don't know if there's a lot of like specific things I can give you, but I think it's just that like whole hunter's mentality, like learning how to be effective in the woods. If you I'm a firm believer that, like, if you can expose yourself to a lot of targets, enough things are going to go wrong that you're going to learn the right thing to do. Right. And that's kind of really what that was like. And I'm like I said earlier, I'm not going to say I'm good at this, but it worked out well with the doe the other day. I had a football coach tell me one time, I get to give a little football knowledge, Tyler.
Right.
How about that?
You
probably
it.
know this already, but we used to do stuff in practice. And they wouldn't, like we'd run, inside hole or whatever. And they wouldn't really coach you up on, like, little technique things they could change. They just watch you for 5 or 6 plays. And when you finally did it right, they'd come tell you, do that again every time.
Yeah.
And that's kind of how that doe felt. It's like, now that I know how to do it right, replicate that each time.
Right.
You know, it's not so much that I need to know what I was doing wrong beforehand, but now I know how to do it right.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we kind of talk about that as far as like scouting public and like learning on our public stuff here, because we don't get as many opportunities to see deer on our public stuff because it's
No
so
kidding.
thick, and our deer densities are a lot lower than they are in other states
Yeah.
or other parts of our state even, you know. And so it's tough to learn. So like you could come tell us, you accessed that place wrong. Your wind was blowing at a buck and he smelled you from 200 yards. You never saw him, or whatever. And we really don't learn a lot from that, you know.
Yeah.
But if we were to say, okay, we access this thing, and here comes a buck. And he's come. Oh, we're gonna get a shot at him, dude. He came right down the right trail. Like, we learned a lot from that, you know. I feel like, and because we saw the deer, or if it's just a doe, like, they came through, they didn't smell us, and they went on, and we didn't shoot them or whatever. Like, we learned something.
Oh,
you know?
sure, yeah. I mean, and we've talked about this before, but like one of our like major stand locations, one day we were forced to hunt it on an off wind just because we could not find the right wind direction.
Yep.
And wouldn't you know, the wind does something weird there
Yep.
and blows your scent straight up in the air.
If we'd have done it wrong and not seen any deer, we probably would have thought, well, we did it wrong. And when technically we hadn't, or we might have, but we wouldn't have learned a lot other than just don't do that again. But we learned that we can hunt that stand on what seems like a wrong wind, because it turned out right for us, you know, or whatever. So.
And it's actually pretty sweet.
Yeah,
whenever
it
that's
is really
happening.
sweet, dude. That is one of the sweetest things we do.
Yeah.
But you know, like as far as I don't know, a couple or another, I guess, since Texas is a bait state, this is kind of a tip that I learned back in the day when I was a young pup hunting with all the old guys, you know, and going on hunting trips and hanging around deer camp and stuff. They'd always say, you know, like, you need to take a chum sack with you. And so what a chum sack is, for guys that don't have a bait state or aren't in a bait state or haven't hunted one, is like, I don't know, 2-3 pounds of corn in a Walmart sack.
Brennan calls it a spatter. He's laying a
He
little
does,
spatter
doesn't
on the ground.
Yep.
A spatter of corn.
Yep. But it's, you know, we always called it chum corn. And so you take a little Walmart sack, you put like 3 pounds in it, you tie it to the back of your bag, and walk to your stand. And when you get there, you go out in front of your stand and you rip a hole in that sack and you throw it all out there in front of you or whatever. Well, if you have that opportunity to do that, one of the tips I learned from the guys at camp is that you throw a little bit out and you spread it out so that they can find it real easy or whatever, you know, coming through. But then you take the majority of that corn and you put it right behind a cactus or, you know, a mesquite log or stump or something like that, where when, you know, typically, because it's in a pile, they're going to end up seeing it or smelling it and going to that pile because they can just chomp down on it, you know. And so when they do that, their head's behind the cactus or whatever it is, and you smoke them, you know. Get something it's got to be a low profile thing, you know. You obviously don't want to hide the vitals behind it. So that's kind of a cool tip as far as the art of the draw goes when you have bait, you know. I mean, playing your ability
if
to
you're
draw
not
that
a
way.
bait state, you could do that with scent or something like that.
Yeah,
you know?
exactly. Oh, I've thought about that before, but I didn't think about it prior to this podcast right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, definitely like if you can set up a scrape where there's like, in our case, an American beautyberry right in front of it that's, you know, 2-3 foot tall, you might could set it up to where you get a shot still over that beautyberry or whatever it might be, you know. So pretty interesting thought there, I guess. You know, I guess. I mean, this has been educational for me to learn from you as well. So I'm glad we did this, dude. I mean, it's always cool to talk about this stuff because this is stuff you don't really talk about too much. Like I said, in media, but also like just riding around the truck, you're always thinking about how to kill a big deer. Where do we go set up, you know, or whatever. Yeah. And so it's good to do this right before the season, I feel like, and hopefully it's helpful to you guys. Hopefully you have been liking the guests that we've had on recently. I think we've had some really cool guests, some really cool information from those guys, and we've got a couple of guests coming up like soon that are like, man, some of the info, we were like looking at each other afterwards like, oh my gosh, we got to try that. So
yeah, these are going to be some pretty good good podcast leading into the rut.
For sure.
Like,
yeah.
I'm dude, the hype level is so high right now because you and I are going hunting in the morning.
I know it.
And like this is like our first good cold front of deer season at least. Like things could happen.
I know, dude. I know. I'm not too optimistic, but I do think that with the way things are going to pan out tonight and right in the early morning, that it could be a different day where things happen. You know, so I'm excited. Make sure if you want to see examples of what we're talking about, we're going to put links to the Nameless video in the show notes here, so you can go watch that Nameless video if you haven't seen it yet, or if you want to kind of refresh and know what we're talking about. How to kill a deer after work. That's our latest video, the one where KC smokes a doe, and we talked a lot about that doe and how the draw worked for that. So go check that out, and you can kind of understand what we're talking about there. Don't forget the Exodus giveaway. That is going on until, we haven't set a date yet, but we will. It's going to be late October. So later this month, we're going to give that away. So you don't have a whole lot of time. You better go and do that because I think it's going to happen before Halloween. Yeah, it has to happen before Halloween. And man, God painted us a good picture tonight, didn't he?
He did,
out there
man.
To the west.
It was pretty awesome. It's kind of crazy how like it was so rainy, and then the sun just peaked down.
Right as we started podcasting, beautiful. I think he wanted to put a special pixie dust on this podcast.
Give us a little light, And it's also that is the clearing out of the high pressure that we're probably going to get tomorrow.
I know it. Cannot wait, dude.
Yeah.
Well, I'm hungry.
Me too. I can smell these poppers. Apparently, the wind is kind of out of the northwest right now because that's where the poppers are from me. And I'm ready to go eat these things.
Yeah, sounds good. Well, don't forget to do that iTunes review for the Exodus giveaway. And also, remember, this is your element.
Live in it.
Hey everybody, listen up. I got mega huge news. Meat Eater Live is heading back out on the road. That's right. Join me and the crew. Clay Newcomb, Cal, Yanni, Spencer's going to be there. Phil the engineer's going to be there. Meat Eater Live, headed back out. Now, when you get every ticket, okay, every ticket you buy, you get a signed copy of our new Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook. This tour is celebrating the release of the book. Buy a ticket, get a signed copy, Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, camp stove, and campfire, which I'll point out is a $38 value. Here's where we're going to go. April 23rd, the Mesa Art Center in Mesa, Arizona. April 24, the Balboa Theater in San Diego. April 25, the Grove in Anaheim, California. April 27, the Crest Theater in Sacramento. April 29, the Union in Salt Lake City. April 30, the Egyptian in Boise. May 1, the Wilma Theater in Missoula. May 2, the Bing Crosby Theater in Spokane, Washington. May 4, Revolution Hall in Portland, Oregon. And May 5, the last day of the tour, Pantages Theater in Tacoma, Washington. For tickets and more information, visit the events page at themeateater.com. Hope to see you at the show.